The streets of Libya's capital right now largely deserted, but the death toll has been rising and rising in Libya. Italy's foreign minister says it may be more than 1,000 already. The strongman Muammar Gaddafi has called on the military to crack down on anti-government protesters. But there are reports that one military aircraft crashed because the crew bailed out instead of obeying orders to bomb oil fields in Libya. The U.S., meanwhile, is struggling to evacuate its citizens from Libya. Hundreds of Americans are set to leave Tripoli for Malta aboard a chartered ferry, but that trip has been delayed by bad weather. They're still stuck there. And President Obama breaks his relative silence on Libya with a public statement.
The suffering and bloodshed is outrageous, and it is unacceptable. So are threats and orders to shoot peaceful protesters and further punish the people of Libya. These actions violate international norms and every standard of common decency. This violence must stop.
Beyond the capital of Libya, opponents of the Libyan regime have gained ground. Despite ordering a crackdown on the opposition, the Libyan leader, Muammar Gaddafi, is facing more and more defections from within his own regime and from within the military. CNN's Ivan Watson has been monitoring all of these dramatic events from Cairo. What's the latest, Ivan?
Well, Wolf, I want to show you some video that illustrates a little bit what people are living through in the streets of Tripoli right now. These are images of men wearing yellow construction helmets, carrying sticks, and beating people in the streets of Tripoli, the Libyan capital. It may be several days old. That fits with an eyewitness account we've gotten again and again, people describing how the security forces and groups of armed men are beating people, preventing them from coming out into the streets of the Libyan capital. In addition to that, we've had many, many reports of groups of armed men shooting in the streets, opening fire on demonstrators as well. Another piece of video that I cannot show you right now, it is very graphic, shows more than a dozen bodies of men with their arms tied behind their back on the side of a highway, Wolf. Some of them with their shoes off, all evidently killed execution style. And the story that is running with that, which is very difficult for us to confirm, is that these were soldiers who were executed because they refused orders to crack down, to open fire on demonstrators. And perhaps as another sign, another piece of evidence of the lengths that some of the armed forces will go to avoid taking some of these, following some of these orders, Wolf. A plane crashed, a fighter plane, earlier outside the eastern opposition-held city of Benghazi today. Fighter pilots ditching the plane and announcing that they had been ordered to open fire on demonstrators and refused. And I've spoken to a doctor on the ground in Benghazi. His colleagues have tried to reach out to this pilot to try to get him to speak to the international media. The man, he says, is simply too afraid to talk. In the meantime, the death toll in Benghazi, this doctor tells me, has risen to 12 more dead today from wounds earlier in fighting with pro-Gaddafi forces. More than 200 people dead in that city alone over the course of the last week.
We know the death toll is rising and rising. We're going to go to Benghazi. Our own Ben Wiedemann is there. But Ivan, while I have you in Cairo right now, what's the latest in Egypt now, a couple of weeks after Mubarak went down?
Well, we have to keep in mind that this unrest, these revolutions we're seeing all across many countries in the Arab world, they're not over even after their dictators are forced to flee in a very humiliating situation here. In Egypt right now, Hosni Mubarak has been deposed, but there is still a wave of strikes, of protests that are being carried out by bank workers, factory workers. And what we saw today was a huge plume of smoke arise from the Interior Ministry, not far from that famous Tahrir Square where the revolution began here in Egypt. And there we came closer and noticed that former employees of the Interior Ministry had held a strike there and then had set fire to buildings around the Interior Ministry compound. They had torched vehicles there as well. There was a lot of vandalism and arson that had taken place there. And when we approached to try to take a look at this, as I was filming the Army and the fire brigades there trying to restore order there, an Army officer grabbed me physically and demanded that I immediately hand over my camera and my video. I refused. He said, he was pulling me aside, Wolf, and said, give it to me and then I will let you go. Now, the Army is now nominally in charge of Egypt right now. This shows that perhaps despite the historic changes here, the ideas of democracy and human rights and freedom of expression and press may not have entirely sunk in with the new military rulers of this largest of Arab countries.
Yeah, well, that's depressing to hear that. Ivan, thank you. We'll stay in close touch. Be careful in Cairo as well. So what would Libyans face after 4 decades of rule by a single strong man? We asked Brian Todd to take a closer look at that contingency. Brian, what did you find out?
Wolf, whenever Muammar Gaddafi leaves, Libyans could be looking into a dark and uncertain future. The basic structures of this country are very unstable right now, and a civil war a real possibility. We have to warn viewers, some of the video in this story is graphic.
He's vowed to stay to the bitter end. But when that end comes for Muammar Gaddafi, Libya's government could implode. The entire structure of leadership there, analysts say, is centered around the power and personality of one man.
With Gaddafi and his family possibly out of the picture in the future, what could fill that vacuum?
The thing about Libya is that there are no institutions. This is a country without institutions. You have tribes, you have some committees on local levels, but there really is no abiding and established government institution here.
That's because Muammar Gaddafi has eviscerated those institutions. He doesn't even have a defense ministry. Experts say there's no legislature of any substance. A National People's Congress and popular committees that rule at the local level function only on his behalf. Libya hasn't had a working constitution since 1969. And unlike in Egypt, the Libyan military wouldn't be able to stabilize the country and manage a transition from Gaddafi's rule.
There is no army as such. What he has different militias, and part of an army which belongs to him. Never trusted the army since the coup attempt against him in '75.
Instead, experts say Gaddafi's gotten members of tribes loyal to him to join his security forces, and he's reinforced them with hired mercenaries from other African countries like Chad, Sudan, and as this video from a Libyan morgue appears to show, Nigeria. Those are the units trying to keep order on the streets now. And as CNN staff on the ground have seen, they've not been able to secure the entire nation. Despite Gaddafi's brutality, experts say, in a country where tribal loyalty comes first, his exit from the scene could be catastrophic.
With such a weak central government and weak armed forces, is there a chance that this country could break apart after Gaddafi leaves?
I think Libya may not survive Gaddafi. There's a real chance that the different regions could go their separate ways. Tripoli and Benghazi have always been at odds.
James Phillips says that could mean Yugoslavia all over again. Libya split between east and west, or between several regions made up of different tribes, and possibly a brutal civil war to sort it all out. He says it could also lead to other countries in the region being destabilized at a time when some of them are going through their own political upheaval. And as we dealt with earlier in the show, Wolf, that could affect oil prices for the rest of the world. So we're all in on this together if Libya falls apart.
Yeah, huge ramifications, Brian. Thank you. Let's turn to someone who's actually met with Muammar Gaddafi. Joining us now, the former Republican congressman, former Intelligence Committee Chairman Pete Hoekstra. Thanks very much, Congressman, for coming in. Over the past 7 years, you met with Gaddafi, what, 3 times in Libya, I take it, right?
That's right.
All right. Is he capable of ordering what remains of his military to kill thousands of his fellow Libyans?
Well, I think, right now, trying to predict exactly what this man and this leader may do is going to be very difficult. Anybody who claims that they know, they're kidding you. Does he have the capacity? I think what we've seen over the last 48 hours, over the last 72, absolutely. I mean, he's already by estimates, killed 1,000 of his own people. Could he go beyond that? Yes.
So what about blowing up his own oil fields, sabotaging the oil, the pipelines and all of that? If he's going to go down, they're going to go down with him. You think he's capable of doing that?
I wouldn't put anything beyond this guy. I mean, 2 out of the 3 meetings that we met with him, he was perfectly rational. You had a good discussion with him. One of the other times it was like you left and say, well, this was a bizarre meeting.
What was so bizarre about him?
You couldn't comprehend exactly what he was saying.
Because he was speaking in Arabic.
No, he would speak some in English.
Really?
Yeah.
But mostly in Arabic through a translator.
Mostly in Arabic through a translator.
Was he high on drugs or anything? Because that's the impression a lot of outsiders have gotten over the years, that the guy was smoking something.
I'd say 2 out of the 3 times he was perfectly rational. You could have had a decent and a civil conversation with him. The 3rd time there was something obviously amiss, whether he was on drugs. I'm not educated to
But you're a
evaluate
chairman
that.
of the Intelligence Committee. Were there reports, suggestions that this is a guy who routinely got high or whatever and was volatile, crazy, weird?
Well, sure, we've heard all of that. That's why, having been there and sat with him, when he was talking about the threat from radical jihadists that his regime faced, he outlined it very, very clearly, the threat. He outlined clearly the steps that not only his regime, but that the U.S. should take in confronting this threat. Could he, at the end of this process, if he really believes that he's going down and he's going out, could he blow up his own oil wells? I think that is a distinct possibility.
All right, so here's a guy who might kill, slaughter thousands more very peaceful demonstrators, men, women, children, young people, or whatever, might blow up the oil wells. So what does the United States do? We heard President Obama a little while ago say there are a lot of options out there. He didn't get into specifics. But what does the United States do, if anything, about this?
Well, to stop these 2 things of him killing his own citizens and blowing up the oil wells would take a very invasive action by both the United States and our allies in Europe and throughout the Middle East. I doubt that this president or our allies are willing to do that.
Military action.
Military action.
What about a no-fly zone, imposing a no-fly zone over Libya the way we did it over Iraq when Saddam Hussein was in power?
We could impose a no-fly zone. We could impose an embargo, an economic embargo, and those types of things. But it wouldn't stop the things that you're talking about.
Would it make sense to move a carrier battle group in the 6th Fleet in the Mediterranean towards the coast of Libya right now?
I think at this point in time, those kind of steps wouldn't have an impact on Gaddafi. Now, it might have an impact on some of the rest of the regime that is still in place, and it might give them some confidence that if they took the steps to get Gaddafi out, that they would be protected.
I guess the question is, and it's a brutal, blunt question, and it's one that the President of the United States would have to answer, and you obviously can't answer it, I can't answer it, but at a point like this, to prevent thousands of people from dying, should the President of the United States order an airstrike, a pinpoint airstrike to go some tent where Gaddafi might be hiding out and kill him?
Having been there 3 times, I can tell you that the American intelligence community right now would not know where Gaddafi is.
You think he moves around that much?
Yeah, I know he moves around. Every time we met with him, it was in a very different place. The first time we went, it took us 7 hours to actually get to the location where he was. They just drove us around Libya for 7 hours until we actually got there. He's got great, personal security and those types of things. I don't think we could take him out with a pinpoint strike.
Even with a pilotless reconnaissance drone, one of those Hellfire missiles going down. You don't think that's...
Drones work great if you know where they are. If someone inside his inner circle provided us with the intelligence, I would think that that is an option that the president should seriously consider if we had great intelligence saying this is where he is.
His interior minister yesterday defected to the opposition. I assume he knows a lot about, he's in charge of the police, he knows a lot about where Gaddafi might be hiding out.
Yeah, it's a very small group of people that Gaddafi depends on for his personal security. You need someone in that inner circle to give you the information.
All right. Thanks very much for coming in.
Good being here. Thank you.
Pete Hoekstra, formerly chairman of the Intelligence Committee in the House. Jack Cafferty is coming up next.